Good afternoon, Sarah Gilbert here, Agent 66, to talk about another of the goddess archetypes. And this afternoon I'm going to talk to you about Mnesme, the goddess of memory, initiator of words and writing, and mother of the muses. So Mnesme's role as a goddess was to enable what had happened in the past to be passed on. And prior to writing being invented, this had to be done by all kinds of memory tools like mnemonics, where we look at the first letter of a schedule of things. For instance, with the muses that we're going to talk about today, you could look at them as ETC being Erato, Terestipo, and Calliope, and remember them from those letters. So it's about the rotes we use when we memorize things. I don't know about you, but when I'm trying to memorize things, I quite often practice writing them down until I'm able to get it right. But of course, this was before they had writing. So there had to be a way of preserving the knowledge, the stories of history, the rules, if you like, what had worked before, and all the myths that existed. Now, myths are quite easy to remember, or I find them so, because they always have a moral. There's always something behind the story. And if you remember the thing behind the story, then it makes it easier to remember what describes it and what goes around it. Mnesme was also said to have invented writing and words. So she really was the key goddess for anyone that's involved in creative exploits of all sorts, whether it be all sorts of different types of writing. The ancients quite often used to write poetry as their way of expressing things. But it's also about how we record songs and how we record plays and so on. So Mnesme came from an earth god, Gaia, or Mother Earth, and a god of the heavens and the sky, Uranus. She was a very powerful goddess, and she's usually shown on her own. So here we have a statue from the garden at Versailles, where you can see here she's involved in some kind of a battle, maybe the war against the giants, and she's shown as being on top of things. She also is shown as being very mysterious, as we can see on the right hand side. In other paintings, she's a beautiful woman, but once again, always very, very contemplative, very reflective, and very alone. So one of the myths about Mnesme on her own was that when people died and crossed into the underworld, they were going to be given a choice whether to drink from the river Lethe, where they would forget all the pains and terrors that they'd experienced in their life, but also they'd forget the lessons they brought. And the other option was to drink from Mnesme, the spring of memory, and that was a kind of pool. And if they chose that one, then they were admitted to the Elysian fields, where they'd spent eternity in comfort and peace. So memory was esteemed very much in that world, very much so. Now here we've got some pictures from the site where this pool of memory is said to exist still. And there's a pool in front of a cave which is called Mnesmy's Cave. It's in a place called Tophonius in Boeotia, and the area is full of springs and water and geysers and rivers. It's a very intuitive kind of place. I've got a very strong connection with Mnesmy. She's right on my ascendant. I identify with her very well, and I had a very strong feeling that this was her cave. And people often, if they were going through these rites, went there as a kind of oracle as well, and went and asked questions of Mnesmy in the cave. But if we go to the main story about her, after the Titan war, the Olympian gods wanted to have some means of having all their deeds and all their myths and stories kept so that mankind could immortalize them. And they asked Zeus to provide some sources of inspiration for the creatives so that that could happen. So he decided that as Mnesmy was such a powerful Titan goddess, she was the best person which he could create these goddesses with. So he convinced Mnesmy to lay with him for 9 consecutive nights. In some versions, it's said that he came to her as a man and he just beguiled her, or he just charmed her into this activity. Others say he was a shepherd and it happened out in the fields, and others still as an eagle, which of course is Zeus's symbol. But whichever way it happened, she was impregnated and gave birth to the 9 Muses. These are some images of the Muses from ancient Greek vases, and as you can see, they're usually involved with musical instruments or reading or writing in some way. Mnesmy brought these Muses up close to nature. Earth and water was very important, and she had them nearby to Mount Helicon, which is a mountainous area in Boeotia. They constantly spent time honing their gifts, and there were many streams and geysers in the area. They lived alongside a favourite animal friend, the winged unicorn Pegasus, and whenever his hooves hit the ground, a geyser would automatically spring forth, because Pegasus actually comes from the same word root as geyser. Another person involved very significantly with the Muses was Apollo, who was called a Musagates, or the guardian and mentor of the Muses, because of course Apollo was the god of creativity, so obviously he wanted to have a strong hand in what the Muses were doing. There are many statues made to them, many beautiful statues. This is a relief that's shown in the Louvre Museum, and you can see the Muses with all their different, all the different sources of information. So, sort of this maybe is Cleo, who with history, we've got tragedy here, an orator here, music. All sorts of different things, and of course astronomy down at the bottom. And here we have Mercury keeping an eye on them all as well, as the god of communication. I visited a place in Greece called the Achilleon in Corfu, which is a palace, sometimes called Sissy's Palace, that was dedicated to Achilles. But there was a beautiful pavilion in there that had statues of the 9 Muses and statues of Mnesmy and Apollo. I've got a view down it. It's a very hard place to photograph, Um, and you can see a couple of the muses here, the muse of dance on one side and the muse of music on the other. So what is a muse? We talked about this a bit when we went through Urania, the muse of astronomy and astrology. And it's really about studying libraries, museums come from the same source of the word. And it's about initiating people into mysteries. So the muses help to elevate the writers, the poets, and so on from the what's going on the earthly plane to what was going on up at the higher realms, and bring inspiration, peace, and harmony to them. So we have a picture here of Urania with the poet Artus. This mosaic shows Virgil, who wrote the Aeneid, being inspired by Clio on the left-hand side, who was the muse of history, and Melpomene, the muse of tragedy, holding the mask on the right-hand side. So they were helping him write his poetry. Here we have Calliope, sometimes spelt with a C, but the asteroid for Calliope is very much with a K. And she was the muse of beautiful epic poetry that was very eloquent. And she's believed to have been the muse that worked with Homer when he wrote the Iliad. And if you look carefully at these pictures, you can see in the background this is Homer sitting there, and she's working with him here. And you can see in this picture we've got someone on her shoulder as she plays on a lyre, because the muses all were very into musical instruments and so on, whatever their other subjects might have been. So here we have Clio, who was in the mosaic with Virgil. So we can see here this clock. She's got her writing pad there, and we have her in the other pictures. In all places she has books and writing associated with her. Erato was the muse of romantic poetry or love poetry, and she quite often had a lyre that she played as well. You can see it in all three of these pictures, and sometimes their muses are shown with as kind of angels with wings. Euterpe was the muse of music, and very obviously she's going to be shown with a musical instrument. I really like the rendition on the right hand side. She looks so etherical and beautiful here. Oops, through too. Melpomene was the muse of tragedy and difficult stories, but difficult stories are quite often the things we remember the most, aren't they? Polyhymnia was the muse of things that were sacred, so sacred hymns and oratory in general. Piscori was the muse of dance. She's the one we see making all the beautiful movements and always having a very beautiful body. Thalia was the comedian of the piece. She was the muse of comedy, but also anyone who acted and so she always was associated with a mask. And Urania, finally, was the muse of astronomy and the stars. Now, no one knows exactly which order the muses were born in. We usually talk about them in alphabetical order, for lack of a different way of doing things. And that wasn't necessarily the order in which the asteroids that have been named for them were discovered, though. So let's have a look at Mnesmes's discovery. She was discovered by a guy called Luther at the Dusseldorf Observatory in Germany. He was the same man that discovered the asteroid of Asteria that we looked at last month. She was discovered at 4 degrees and 34 minutes of Aries, so very near to the start of her round of the zodiac. And you can see sitting next to her, she has Neptune at 25 degrees and 39 of Pisces. Very strong Neptune in its rulership. So Neptune is about our imagination. It's about our creativity. So it seems very appropriate that the goddess that was going to be the mother to the Muses came into the world with Neptune's energy merging with her own. The glyph that I'm using for Mnesimne isn't my preferred one. There isn't a glyph within Solar Fire for Mnesimne, even though there is one that looks a bit like that one upside down. So I've just selected one that suited my needs. I don't actually work with the Muses in general. In the astrology I do, I work with Mnesimne, most definitely, and Urania, of course, because of her association with the stars and astronomy. But the other Muses don't really fit in with what I'm looking at, so I haven't given them glyphs for their asteroids. For that reason, I've just set it up so they become numbered. And if you look down at the bottom there, you will see that Erato, I've numbered them in alphabetical order. So Errata is A1, Euterpe is A2, Calliope is A3, Cleo is A4, and so on. So when you're working through this, you'll be able to find those quite easily. They're all main belt asteroids, so they all sit in between Jupiter and Mars. And as almost always the case with discoveries, all of them were discovered when they were retrograde, so opposite to the Sun. And of course, this is the time when they reflect the most light, so they're going to be the most visible in the sky at that time. I've put together a little chart for you here in the order of their discovery. So Melpomene was the first to be discovered. She was the 18th asteroid overall to be discovered in June of 1852. And she was discovered by J.R. Hind. Notice that some of the Muses were actually discovered or given the names of, or asteroids were discovered and given the name of Muses before an asteroid was given Mnesimne's name. So her daughters came before she did in the calendar order of things. This chap Hind, he obviously had an affinity with the Muses, and he named 5 of the Muses from his discoveries between June 1852 and July 1854. I've also included on this chart what material type the asteroids are. Most of them are silica types. The Calliope was a dark mass asteroid, and there are different categories, a calcite for the seas, and I can't quite remember what the G is. I've also put in there the time it takes them to orbit around the Sun in AU or Earth years. So you can see that Mnesimne is the slowest, very closely followed by Erato. So they all go in a band between about 3.5 years up to nearly 6 years in the case of Erato and Mnesme. So polyhymnia was discovered by a Frenchman. Then we have Mnesme with Luther. Then we have some other people from Berlin and Marseille, and finally Luther again with Cleo. So they spanned in all 13 years, their discoveries of the 10 of them. So I guess what you're wanting to know is, what are they doing now? And we've already talked about what they're doing, how quickly they're moving. But right now, there's a huge focus around where the focus is elsewhere in the chart, which is around Virgo for the new moon, which is coming up tomorrow night. So Mnesme and Cleo, who was the muse of history and writing, are in an earth sign, whereas the 4 of the other ones are in Virgo. So we've got a huge component of earth signs amongst these creative signs at the moment. So it's very much a time where writing and creative work is being favoured. And anyone who has projects in those areas would be a really good time to get out and do your affirmations with this particular Virgo new moon. I have another chart here which is showing you for each of these asteroids what position they were in when they were discovered and what their current position is. So you can make comparisons there, but you can see that initially there was a little bit of a favouring of the first part of the zodiac. We had 3 in Aries, we had another 3 in Taurus, and then 1 in Gemini, 1 in Capricorn, and 2 in Aquarius. So sort of both ends of the zodiac seem to be the times where they made themselves felt out into the world. And you can see there the focus on Earth at the moment with the currently with Taurus and Virgo. I thought I'd put in a chart for the actual Virgo new moon, especially as it's a solar eclipse. And for us here in Melbourne, that's happening at 7:03 p.m. tomorrow night, the 1st of September. So we've got Polyhymna, Urania, Cleo and Euterpe, who are going to be working in between the Sun and Moon and Jupiter and the North Node. So they're very much in that area. There's a great big stellium there. So very much anyone who's writing about the stars, who's bringing in poetry or reflections from the past, or maybe even thinking of bringing in music with Euterpe, it's going to be a very favourable time for that. And you can see that Mnesme and Melipone are in Taurus. Melitone, of course, has got a more negative feeling to her, but maybe it's about thinking about tragedies from the past as she's with her mother, and memories very much on the mind. Now, how do you find these? I recommend that you go to saranu.com, where it's a free ephemeris that you can find. You've got the URL at the top. You can find these asteroids within Solar Fire, and in the General Asteroid Bank there is a group of asteroids for the Muses that you might be able to find quite easily. But you can see here you need to put the numbers of the asteroids that you want to bring up into Serenu in the place I've boxed lower down. So we've got there 18, 22, 23, 27, etc. You put your date of birth. You leave it on the settings that I have there to sort by name, and it will come up with the first 100 asteroids, including the ones that you've selected in an alphabetical list. So that's a good way to find where those asteroids were at your time of birth, and then you can compare it with where they are now. So what you do with it, you'd look and see what sign the different muses and Mnesme are in, what house or area of life they're influencing, whether they're conjunct or squaring an angle, and whether they're conjunct or squaring or opposite to your sun, moon, or your nodes. I use within 2 degrees as having a very significant effect, but within 8 degrees is going to have some effect. And of course, if you get a lot of things all together, like the stellium we have around the new moon, then sort of you can really just look for 8 degrees between one and the next one. So you can get quite a large portion of the zodiac taken up with a stellium working together. So to use as an example, here's my chart. I've shown you this one before, but I'm focusing very much on Mnesme here. And we can see her within less than 1 degree. My ascendant's 22.7 and Mnesme is 22.41. So only just over half a degree difference, and into the first house. So that's given me a gift of memory, which means I'm able to remember my myths very well, and writing about them is something that I really love. On the opposite of the side of the chart, we have Selene, who is a moon goddess that drove the chariot of the moon across the skies, just over 1 degree different, and a little bit wider we have Urania, so the muse of astrology. So it's no wonder that it's astrology that I'm writing about. We've also got squares to Asteria, another star goddess, very important, that we talked about last week. And down here we have Hebe, and we have Achilles with Ishtar a little bit further out. So that's worked to help me, give me the ability to stay young and to have the courage to take on all this astrological research and study late in life. And if you look at them together, it makes up a fixed grand cross, and there's only about a 1 degree or difference between one point on all those points of the cross, or the grand square, whichever you like to call it. When you have that kind of thing, it can give you a lot of difficulties and challenges, but it also, being fixed, gives you a lot of persistence and determination that you're going to make things happen. So that's the kind of thing you can do with your asteroids. So I've given you quite a few to play with this month, and I gave you quite a few last month. So I hope you're enjoying it, and I'd really love to get some feedback on how you're finding it's working out for you. Okay then, bye-bye.